begin. This is a special meeting of the Troy City Council on January 31st. And Mrs. Bartholomew, will you do the roll call, please?
Mayor Schiller?
Here.
Councilmember Beltramini?
Here.
Fleming?
Here.
Howard-Leck?
Here.
Kerwin?
Here.
McGinnis?
Here.
Slater?
Here.
Quorum present. This meeting was called for the purpose of a review of the ICMA report. And we're here at 6 o'clock. As we said, we were going to begin the study. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Zerlake, who will make the introductions.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. Back in September, City Council commissioned to the International City Management Association to take a look at 8 elements within the organization, which covers essentially every department, as well as an element of pay and benefits for City of Troy employees. The project manager is Craig Rapp, and he is here with his team tonight. Element number 1 will be police department, which will not be discussed tonight, but will be discussed at a later time. And so if I may, I'd like to just turn this over to Mr. Rapp to explain his report and then answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Rapp.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, and assembled folks. What I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the opportunity and a few acknowledgments here. ICMA, the International City County Management Association, is very pleased to have been given the opportunity to assist you with this project. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Zerlag and all of the employees who spent innumerable hours. We did a very significant study in a very short period of time. As Mr. Zerlag pointed out previously when we were here, time was of the essence. You are facing a fairly significant financial challenge, and you are driving forward to balance your budget, not only in the current year, but in the out years. And so he asked us if we could accelerate our normal time schedule for a project of this magnitude. And even though we're a couple weeks later in delivering it than we had originally hoped to do, it was done in a 75-day period. And that would not have been possible, really, without the hard work of the employees of the City of Troy and Mr. Zerlag's personal staff. I have with me 2 of my team members. You should all have, I should ask you, did you all get a copy of the final bound report? And on the cover there, it does indicate my team consists of me as the project manager, Tom Wazorek, who is here tonight. Tom wrote the fire report. Tom may be familiar to some of you. Tom spent his entire practitioner career as in the city of Ionia, Michigan, both as city manager and as director of public safety. I also have John Thiel, who was doing our maintenance functions and the public works work. Also Susan Robinson and Jim Prosser, who are not here tonight, were part of the ICMA team. In addition to that, 2 sister organizations worked with us, the Center for State and Local Government Excellence, who functions as an organization that looks at health, pension, and other benefits, employee benefits exclusively. They did the work supporting us on the pension and post-retirement benefit review. Chuck Thompson, representing the International Municipal Lawyers Association, did the work reviewing the law department. Because of the special relationship that the city attorney has with the city council, we wanted to make sure that we had the right team in place, and IMLA made sense for us. So with that, okay, Mark, I managed to do that right away, didn't I? Mark told me that I should be very careful, and I made it through 1 slide.
Don't press in.
Yeah, don't press. He said don't press in, so of course I did. Tonight's presentation will consist of a review of the project purpose, objectives, and our approach. I'm going to talk a little bit about the major themes that we found, run through the major findings and recommendations, our proposed implementation schedule, and then I will take questions and answers. The purpose, if you boil it down to its simplest, was to help the city to address a very significant financial challenge that confronts you. Right now, you are looking at a structural problem that will play out over a period of years, and what you asked us to help you with is determine the sustainability of your operations and the level of service delivery to address that financial challenge. Now, The other thing that was hoped would happen, and I'm hoping that you'll see that it is happening as a result of our recommendations, it gives you an opportunity to accelerate the effort to implement changes. You've already taken a number of steps, and we'll get into that in just a moment, but with the help of ICMA, hopefully you can accelerate the pace of change. As John mentioned a moment ago, these are the project elements. You'll be hearing from us next month or maybe in early March on the police department, but all of the other departments you see there were part of the original scope of services that we provided to you. In order to undertake something of this magnitude and to address the fundamental issues that were confronting the city, we had to create a project approach that was fairly comprehensive in nature. It started with a review of the core services that you have, and that was done in light of the priorities that you have already indicated. You have a 3-year budget, you've indicated what is important to you, and it was made clear to us that that's how we should be reviewing your situation. So we did that, evaluating your staffing and the service delivery in those core service areas, all to determine whether or not you would be able to be sustainable after a implementation of what we're calling, and you have called, Option 1. You've asked us for recommendations on reorganizing and restructuring, as well as efficiency and cost effectiveness. And also because, frankly, and I'll say this up front, I mentioned it in a report a number of times, the City of Troy, in our judgment, has been a leader in evaluating and implementing alternative methods for delivering service. You've got many examples of that, from your building inspection to golf courses to the hybrid situation you have with engineering. You've asked us to look at that, and we also took a look at that, and we balanced all the costs, benefits, and realities of those modifications using our best professional judgment. And then subsequently, we also then took a look at the benefits and salaries in your organization. I know that's of particular interest to you. I should say before launching into that in every case across the country, and ICMA has is uniquely positioned to be able to see a lot of this go on across the country, both from a consulting perspective because we work with communities, but also because we're a professional association, and many of the things that we do to support jurisdictions across the country is to provide a forum, to provide training. We also provide a variety of publications and technical assistance of a written nature. So we get involved in hearing about what people are doing, seeing best practice, documenting best practice. We have somewhat of a unique perspective on that. And I will tell you that that is what has informed, in particular, the alternative service delivery piece and also the comparative salary and benefit piece. These are what I would consider the major themes and things that I'd like you to pay particular attention to as we talk tonight. To start with, you have a structural budget problem. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. What I would comment on, and what I did say in the report, what we said collectively in the report, is that you did take, your management team, your city manager, took bold and I think very aggressive action to try to address that. You had been doing things over a period of time, ranging from staff layoffs to evaluating these alternative service delivery mechanisms, and leading up to what we're calling Option 1, which is this 5-year plan to reduce the organization down and meet that budget challenge. That structural budget problem informed everything that we did as part of this evaluation. We said, okay, you have a plan. Your plan will get you to X. What are the implications of X? The solution's in place, but the sustainability was in question. And what we're trying to help you understand is what the implications of that sustainability determination are. A lot of people talk about doing less with less, or the new normal. Where are we? Frankly, where everyone is going, and when I say everyone, Michigan, Nevada, Florida, California, some of the hardest hit states are at the forefront. But there are a lot of other states close behind, and what they're talking about now is not doing more with less. They're talking about doing less with less. That's really the new normal. And frankly, if I have no other comment to make to you tonight, it's getting comfortable that where you're headed is a rebalancing, a prioritizing, resizing, and rebalancing of the organization. If, in fact, you agree that you have a structural budget problem and you have a long-term declining revenue stream, and you're going to take a long period of time to come out of that, you need to think about less with less. What are our current service levels? What will our future current service levels be? And how are we going to meaningfully prioritize, resize, and rebalance to meet that new lower level? I think you have a tremendous opportunity here, on the other hand, because you've already done many things that a lot of communities haven't done. You have taken some action to reduce the size of your staff. You have done a number of alternative service options. And so you can leverage that experience. Because you're not coming from a standing start, but rather a running start, you can leverage that and you can move quickly. I'd also like to believe that when you have time to dig into our report at a more deep level, more meaningful level, you'll be able to use the recommendations and the advice that we are providing and take that leveraged experience and move to another level, to that rebalance level, whatever that is in Troy. So let me start by just recapping the positive findings first, and I will go through the findings and the recommendations that you've already read in the report. City's efforts to outsource and privatize, as I've said a couple of times, in our judgment, is leading practice. And I say that having worked with a number of communities that have done a lot of this. There are some that are farther along, but they are few in number and spread far across the country. You're doing about as much as the best practice communities are doing. And so I would tell you that's a great thing, and it's something that you can be proud of. Also, your actions to address the cost of employee benefits, particularly pensions and post-retirement benefits, place you among the leaders there. You're doing things that are going to position you well. There will be plenty of reasons, and there's lots of room to argue about whether you've gone far enough or you haven't finished doing what you need to do. I'm not commenting on that. What I'm telling you is from an objective perspective, as you compare what you're doing to what others are doing, it puts you in the category of those who are doing as much or more than others. Your cost structure and your staffing is comparable, and in some cases below cities of similar types and size. I sent you out a variety of charts and graphs. We looked at a lot of comparables. We have a number of additional charts and graphs that we will send you subsequently. We're still actually an active collection of data. One of the things that I'll give you a peek behind the curtain of what goes on at ICMA, we have something called the Center for Performance Measurement. Center for Performance Measurement has about 200, 250 communities, depending on the time of day or year, who report to us on a variety of performance measures. So we get a chance to look at what many of those graphs and charts say about a lot of cities across the country, and cities and counties. And so we're able to mine that data, but we also go out periodically for projects like this, and we find comparable communities, and we go out and we try to get that data. And what we were able to find in setting up this comparable set is that you're comfortably in competition or comparable in terms of your structure and your staffing. Now, some cases you're above, some cases you're below, but I would say on the balance, you're doing pretty well. And frankly, much of what you've done over the last couple of years isn't captured in those graphs because we had to go back to the most recently audited year, which is 2009. And you've done lots since 2009. So I would say that if you had to take this from a macro scale, you're sliding backwards, and I mean backwards in a good way in terms of competitiveness. So that's the picture there. Your salaries and current benefits are comparable to Michigan cities, and your measures, as I said before, are leading the way. I was struck, and my entire team was struck, that you have pockets of innovation, and I would say, I call it entrepreneurial spirit within the organization, that I think will hold you in good stead over the long term. You have folks that are willing to do things and look at things from a different perspective. That's not true across the board, but that's not to say that you don't have dedicated employees. It's just that there are places in the organization where it's really demonstrated. And you've got some people who have really stepped out and tried some unusual things. And I think that will help you as you go forward and try to deal with your financial problems. I really think that in terms of efficiency, you've also been able to figure out a few things that some other cities haven't been able to, or at least you've been willing to try some things that other cities haven't been willing to try. And I know I sound probably like a broken record here, but the point I'm trying to drive home as a general point about this is that Troy is competitive. Troy has done some things that others haven't done. And I would, and if I had to say this again in sort of a grand sweeping statement, you've got yourself well positioned for the future. So let's talk about some things that cause us some concern. You have a 6-year plan or 5-year plan, depending on how you're looking at that, but it's the option 1 plan. To address long-term revenue line will make a number of services unsustainable. Now, when we're saying unsustainable, and from this point forward tonight, when I use the term unsustainable, that's unsustainable after all of those cuts are made, and it's at the current service level that you currently provide. And I'll talk more about what I mean about current service level in a moment, too. In addition, most of your departments and functions are at or nearing their breaking point. You've mined all of the low-hanging fruit. You've figured out how to do things in a different way. And people aren't really complaining about that. We didn't hear a lot of complaining. But you're really at a place where without some additional, what I would call more formalized guidance, formalized and specific guidance about where we go from here, you're just not going to be able to do more with less. And I think that's not probably something that doesn't make sense with you, or you couldn't just know intuitively. But what most organizations do in the early stages of financial crisis is all of what I would call the typical things. Well, you've done the typical things plus some, and so now you're at the point where you need to really do some additional soul searching. Your prioritized outputs are good as far as they go, but they really only provide a generalized set of guidance to your staff. They don't really provide what I would consider to be an adequate framework for making detailed service level choices that'll be necessary if you're going to reconcile where you are today with what these budget cuts will do to your service delivery in the future. Just as maybe an example of what I'm talking about here, you've had, as I understand it, some detailed discussions over the last few months about your snow and ice removal policy, right? And you've dug into the details of that. You've talked, your staff has given you specifics about what the implications are, what that means. You've gone back and forth about that. What I'm saying going forward, that's the kinds of discussions you'll have to have in other service areas and a greater level of depth. Now, I want to make a real clear distinction here. I'm not saying that the city council needs to be managing the departments or micromanaging the details of this. What I'm saying is your staff, and part of what we've done by giving you additional details with this report, has told you, here are the implications, here's what we're devoting to your core services. You need to be in partnership with your leadership and your employees generally by helping to clarify what's acceptable and not acceptable as service delivery, and then talk honestly and specifically about how you're going to get to wherever it is that you've decided that point is. Your proposed plan that you already have balances the budget. I mean, you have a balanced budget long term. The problem is that the decisions and detailed implications have not been what I'm calling fully acknowledged or embraced by your staff. Now, again, I'm not saying that your staff didn't understand what Mr. Zerlag was saying, but I think, like many organizations who are confronted with these circumstances, they're in a semi-state of self-denial, thinking, well, we've weathered storms before and things have turned out okay, or, can't they see that we're doing everything that we can? Many of those kinds of comments and reactions have happened. I really think, frankly, that you do have a plan, but you're really going to have, and I'm saying you, I'm in the generic you, the leadership team and the management of the city, is going to have to really spend a fair amount of time impressing upon the organization, the rank and file folks, that this is real, and this is long-term, and this is permanent. And they will need, Mr. Zerlag and the rest of the management team, will need your support to clarify how real that is, and what is that's going to happen. And so for the staff who you're going to need to make these changes real, you're going to have to help and support, I think, the management team there. You got a 3-year budget. That's very good. That's good practice. It's important. But you don't have other things that what I would call best-in-class organizations would have that help you get to the place of managing this downturn or this less with less, new normal, call it what you will, condition. Those things are some sort of formal business planning, strategic planning, and performance measurement package. Now, you can do as little or as much of that as you deem appropriate. But what I'm saying is you still need to do more than you're doing now. And we can talk about what that means and what that might look like, but it's really about taking some of what you've done to identify priorities and goals and formalize it, talk a little bit more about outcomes and how you would build a business plan to secure those outcomes, and how you would measure the performance of your organization and the indicators of success reaching those outcomes. That's a package of things. Again, you can do it as simply or as complex in a way as you deem appropriate, but I would say that if you're going to survive in the future, some form of that needs to occur. Questions at this point? I don't want to get too deep into it, but if I've been unclear about anything, I just want to make sure I'm checking. Okay. Well, recommendations. So that's what we found, and those are the things we learned over that 75-day period. Here are the recommendations, starting from the largest and going down. We believe that restructuring and consolidating functions is, first and foremost, your best hope for maintaining some semblance of current service levels. One of the things that we found was that you've got a structure that could use some flattening and could use some consolidation. That provides you a couple of things. And again, I happen to be someone who doesn't think that structure leads. I happen to be someone that thinks that here's what we're trying to accomplish, what's the best structure to get there. But I think you have a pretty good idea of what you need to do. And so our suggestion is reduce some layers, flatten it, make sure that you're combining some of these very small parts of the organization with other very small parts that seem to have some synergy. Gives you the best opportunity for cross-training, gives you the best opportunity to do what limited resources will allow you to do. We also think that in the future, it's all hands on deck. People should be doing as much hands-on management as possible. So again, that goes with the delayering piece, but we really think that if you're going to make it at all and try to continue with the service levels that you've got, that's your best way of doing it. And there's some specifics we can talk about in a minute, but I'll leave it at that. The other thing is that also helps you for some of your outsourced contracts. One of the recommendations later, we'll talk about accelerating the pace of examining that and maybe doing that. If you've got more interconnections, you've got more people backing up that process and working together in the process of managing those contracts or that outsourced or privatized set of service deliveries. Coming back to that point I made a little earlier, we really think prioritizing, resizing, and rebalancing in line with that new revenue base is crucial. You've just got to come to grips with the fact that you've got a floor. You have an interesting chart or graph in your budget that shows the decline and the very, very, very long climb. I believe it was 2028 or something before your head comes above water. I mean, folks, if that doesn't sober you up and say we're at a new lower level, nothing will. And so I think it's about saying, hey, we're at a new lower level. Let's figure out what that means and what that looks like. So I would say that the management team, along with the leadership team, all of you here, you need to work on taking at least what your staff has done and what is included in here with your core service review. Your staff did an unbelievable job of documenting the details of what your services are, what the resources are that are dedicated to it, and what the implications of the budget cuts are going to be. You're already moving down the continuum of figuring out how to prioritize that. The missing link is a conversation or series of conversations about how and what do you do with that. And I think you need to determine, and this is one that I didn't play up too much in the report, but I really feel is very important. I think you need to determine an achievable balance between service elimination and cost containment measures, specifically as you talk about salary and benefits. It's easy to say, okay, well, we've got 65-75% of our budget is in people and benefits, and so of course we have to go there because that's how we regulate that cost. And you should and you can take measures to do that. At some point, you start eating your seed corn, however. If you reduce the benefits and salaries to a point where Troy is no longer competitive in the marketplace, then you'll start to suffer. And, I don't know where that magic point is, but I think you need to engage in a meaningful discussion about that because you're already on the way there. You've held some salaries frozen and range adjustments frozen for the last couple of years. It's bringing you back to a place of both comparability and I think maybe under in some cases. That's fine. And you're probably not there yet. But if you continue that for a long period of time, you will reach that tipping point. And I think it's incumbent on a leadership team to understand what that is, where that is, and then set a marker for yourself and try to determine what's the right balance. What's the right balance? I think if you initiate some strategic and business planning, that will help you. Part of what I mean by that, and let me be real clear what I'm talking about. I'm saying that if the road ahead is murky, you need a map, okay? And the map is the strategic plan. It's saying, here's the outcomes that we want to achieve. Be clear about those. It's okay to say public safety, public works are important priorities and we want to protect those, but you need to go a little deeper than that and say, within that context and in all of the other services that are still going to remain in addition, what are the things that we want to achieve? What are those outcomes we're seeking to get to? And then let's put a plan around that, a business plan. And when I say business plan, I'm saying what are the initiatives we're willing to fund and what are the things we're willing to get rid of that don't serve those outcomes. Put it in black and white in a context. That gives you an ability to prioritize those services and those resources, and it puts you in line with a lot of what I would call the best practice organization. Now, in my mind, that starts with understanding what your customer wants. If you think you know that, then more power to you, you're way ahead of the game. I do think on an ongoing and regular basis, you ought to have mechanisms for testing out some of what you're determining with your customers. Is that a survey? Are those town hall meetings? I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. But I do think your job, if I can be as bold as to state that, is to represent those interests, but it's also to learn about those interests and to make sure that you're testing what it is that the citizens really want. And maybe you'll be surprised to find that they're willing to do without X if they can get more of Y. But I think it all comes back to seeking input on those service levels as you make those hard decisions about where those service levels have to go. And then once you do that, then there's the additional discussion over a long period of time about what would the few key metrics be that we would want to have in place that we monitor, that tell us whether we're making any progress or whether we're doing a good job meeting the demands of our customers. Best in class organizations do that. You've got that in place in a number of your departments. It's not uniform across all departments, but you're already part of the way there in many places. So you've got a way to build on that. In our mind, one of the best things and I don't know if it's easy, but it probably is easier for Troy than it is for others, is I think you can build a culture of continuous improvement. And I think that's your way forward to a better handling of your crisis. What do I mean by that? Well, you've already started by outsourcing and privatizing a number of things. You took it upon yourself to say, how do we optimize these services? What's the best way to deliver those? And you went out and you checked the marketplace, and you had employees, in some cases, compete for that business. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying use that knowledge, use that expertise, put everybody in the barrel at some point, expose them to a competitive test. It doesn't have to be necessarily managed competition, but everyone has to satisfy you or the management of the organization that they are doing things as efficiently, effectively, and competitively as possible. And so what I'm saying is, and what we're saying collectively is, initiate some cycles of continuous review. That means all the time, ongoing. It'll be determined by you all about how frequently everyone gets reviewed, but it should be continuous. We think that establishing competitive contracting as a standard operating procedure is a good thing. Again, it doesn't mean that you're going to have managed competition in every department. I don't think that's realistic. I'm not even sure that's a good idea. What I do think is a good idea is that every person in the organization should be thinking about the fact that, am I doing this the most effective and efficient way? How do I know that? How do I explain that to my boss? How do I explain that to you, the ultimate bosses? What would that look like if I was doing that? That's what we're talking about. And I think in order to do that, you need to designate someone. I'm not saying create a new position here. I'm saying designate someone currently within your organization as what I would call the service improvement director or some similar kind of title, just so you have a focal point and a person who can have responsibility for making sure that that happens. Because ultimately, you're going to want to develop some metrics, you're going to want to train staff, you're going to want to do a number of things to make sure that this is now the new way of doing business. One of the things that private business knows that the public sector really hasn't joined the crew on is process improvement. I think I said in the report, and if I didn't, I'll say it here. If a business isn't constantly improving its processes and reducing its costs, it's not going to stay in business. Cost is everything. Most of your cost is in your process. It's in wasted steps. It's in ineffective use of resources and ways of doing business. And it's really a focal point of many organizations to just constantly dig in and look at process. I happen to teach process improvement, so I get a chance to talk to a lot of people in the public sector about this. And there are some examples out in local government of process improvement, but they're very few and far between. It's gaining momentum now, particularly with the financial crisis. But I would tell you that I think if the organization, and this is not a short-term thing, let me be clear here, this is a long-term thing, but I think if you can start by saying, we believe that looking at our processes will yield something, and commit to it, and allow your staff to get some training, and slowly over a long period of time start focusing on the most important processes, let's say, I think that will yield some really great benefits. One of the first things you'll notice, from my experience, is that it frees up capacity. Process improvement, lean thinking, it goes by a lot of words, Lean Six Sigma. It allows you to get rid of the non-value added steps or the wasteful steps in a particular set of processes and limit your focus on the things that are driving value for any particular enterprise. That's what we're talking about here. Again, big idea, but it can yield, and a big step, but it can yield good results. All right, on to some general recommendations. Those were things that we're saying at an enterprise-wide level need to occur. We think, as I mentioned a moment ago, that there should be a regularly scheduled competitive review. We should have competitive performance metrics. I think number 3 here is one that I want to make sure I explain. Your staff, and I want to take a minute. If you look at under Appendix A and B, your staff spent a gigantic amount of time using a template, or 2 templates that we provided, to identify what your core services were and to classify them as either mandatory, discretionary, administrative, to identify, in addition to that, how many people and what resources were being associated with those core. And again, I'm just asking you to look at it just so you're familiar with it. But the point is, if you could believe me when I tell you that that was a gigantic undertaking that very few organizations do, you would take advantage of that by scheduling some time to have serious discussion with your staff about those implications and of whether or not their interpretation of mandatory and discretionary conforms with your view of mandatory and discretionary. Now, there will be some things that state law, city ordinance, and what have you will prescribe. But this was the staff's interpretation of that. And I again, this is no disparagement of staff. You need to weigh in on that. And I think there's a reasonable give and take that you can have on some of that. And I think that's a productive discussion to have. If you're in a place that says we have to migrate to less service or different kinds of service, then it really benefits everyone to understand what's truly required and what's truly discretionary. Because those are the first things that you need to get a handle on. I will even go so far as to say, within the category of required, okay, it's required, but does it say in the law how you do that? It might not. It might just say you have to do it. There still may be a range of ways of conforming to that essential delivery of service. I mean, you have to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of your community, which means that you need a police force of some sort and a fire department to provide that. Does it say at what level? Not necessarily. So you have some discretion. Even in the most basic, fundamental things that you do, you still have a wide range of discretion as to how you deploy resources. Troy has been known for a long period of time as a high-quality community, and for good reason. You provide for your citizens well. But I think up to and including now, that has been, in some cases, well-defined, in most cases, not well-defined or understood. What I'm telling you going forward is you don't have that luxury anymore. You just don't have that luxury. You're going to need to spend more time, roll up your sleeves and get to that point of saying, okay, I guess that's what this really means now. I got to confront the harsh reality, and I have to deal with that. Businesses do it every day. People do it in their family budgets. You can do it here, but it takes a lot of focus on the information that you are provided. Again, we think that the training of staff and the customer contact stuff is really important as a way of making sure that that happens. Okay. Your organization chart looks like this, and I realize, given a PowerPoint slide, it's pretty hard, and even with my glasses in my advanced years, I can't see this. What you've got is, this is your existing organization chart. Right now, Mr. Zernlag has 2 assistants who have a wide range of responsibilities in addition to 4 other direct reports. What we're trying to tell you, both directly and indirectly, is that Mark and John, the assistant managers, are doing what is essentially a department head role, and we're saying this needs to be driven even more directly into a department head role. And we think that if you consolidate functions and move some boxes around, you can drive that. I was hoping that no one would point out the fact that I said flatten the organization, and we went from something that looks kind of flat to something that doesn't look very flat. But the reality is that you've got more opportunity here to provide synergy with, particularly within finance and administrative services, and now within public works, because what we're recommending in those cases is that the departments of human resources, city clerk, purchasing would be unsustainable under the option 1 cuts. You're just not going to be able to support them in the configuration that you had here, standing alone, isolated. You need to do something about that, frankly. And in the grand scheme, we think that it makes a lot of sense to pull those resources together and provide an opportunity. What we're saying here is we're providing an opportunity. We're not waving a magic wand and saying 2 weeks from now, if you move the boxes around, everything will be hunky-dory. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this gives you a fighting chance to have all of these resources collectively move together, to figure out how some cross-training can happen, to figure out how we might do things differently, fundamentally, and maybe because we've got new people talking to new people, some new ideas will emerge. This will take a period of time to play out, but you should do that soon, and you should do that in this manner, in our judgment. In Public Works, you had the Public Works Director, a very large and important department, one of your priority departments, reporting through an assistant. We think that it makes sense for that individual, Tim, to report to the city manager. And we also think that there's some synergies in the maintenance area and in some of those delivery areas like park maintenance and building ops that could be moved into DPW so that you had, again, more of an opportunity to share, because frankly, streets and drains and park maintenance is going to be unsustainable at the significant level of reduction that you're talking about. The good news here, if there is even small good news in that, is that the final decisions are a couple years out for those cuts in the streets and drains in particular. You have a little time to react to that, but nonetheless, we think that needs to happen soon so that you can get underway with those efforts. Those are very important. And in addition to that, it now gives you major departments, all very important, both from a support and a direct delivery of service, directly to the city manager. Gives him an opportunity to more closely and directly interact with that. I did leave out community and economic development, and I should not have. Community and economic development is the underpinning of what at least I understand to be what you hope will help to accelerate a recovery, which is good economic and community development. If, in fact, we are in a recovery and we can get some traction and Troy can compete well with others in the economic development realm, then you need to mobilize forces as best you can to keep the pressure on and to compete well in that marketplace. And so if you take what used to be that function, and I have to say right now, between the community economic development efforts and your downtown development district efforts, you're doing you're leveraged pretty well. You distribute that activity well. You're getting a pretty good deal between what John does and what Mark does. But I think, and we think collectively, that moving that into a new department called Economic and Community Development, it can allow you to marshal all of those common resources between engineering, planning, economic development, community affairs, all the things that need to be aligned and working together effectively in that development, land planning, real estate area, so that if you're going to recover, you can be on the front end, the leading end of that. You're leveraging your activities and you're focusing your activities. So, implementation. We think within the first 6 months, or what I'm calling immediately, merge park maintenance with street maintenance, as I mentioned a moment ago, move building operations into Public Works as a new division of Public Works as opposed to a standalone department. We think you should move risk management into HR and then take HR and risk management along with city clerk and move that into the finance and administrative services area. Again, providing those synergies and allowing those sort of small standalone pieces to get a better chance of survival. We think redeploying the assistant city managers as department directors makes a lot of sense and gives you more hands-on. I mean, it's not that they're not doing that, but it gives them more direct hands-on than they're doing today. We think you should appoint a director of, in this first 6 months, director of service improvement. That will allow that individual or the management team collectively to create a staff team to coordinate and prioritize the report recommendations. You have got a lot of stuff here. I mean, there's many recommendations, detailed, layered. We think it's important for you to get a handle on that, start prioritizing your efforts. We think someone needs to be designated to do that, and a team of internal staff should be on that right away. We think you need to prioritize your efficiency and effectiveness recommendations. You can't do everything. So what are the most appropriate things, both from the standpoint of ease of initiation and potential cost savings, and start prioritizing those. I think from the standpoint of what you all in this room can do and what you need to do in the next 6 months is define your commitment to service prioritization and budgeting. And I don't say this lightly. This implies that you're going to have to do a lot of work. And I don't mean to tell you how to do your work. I just mean to suggest that it will be a lot of work. And so you have the right to say, yeah, I'm happy with the way things are. You can say at the end of the night tonight, we like option one, it balances the budget, and the implications are fine, and you could be done with it. If that's not okay, and you are serious about some of the things that we're saying, if not all the things that we're saying, then I think you owe yourself some clarity on what your commitment is to the prioritization and budgeting process. And what that means is holding some work sessions to, I think, clarify some roles, clarify your commitment, and then I would say make a formal commitment to a process. That doesn't have to happen in the first meeting, but I think John and I have talked a lot about what that might look like. I've given some resources. I'm going to give you some more resources on how others have done this. You can use that as a model. There's plenty of them out there. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It really just is about, I'm opening a door for you, and do you want to walk through it or not? And what's that going to look like? Once you initiate a service prioritization process, it's really important that you establish a schedule and a process for the council staff review. And I think really this is about saying, do you really want to have that a closed system? Do you want to open that up for additional public input? You may have all the public input you've needed. And I don't know how to judge that. I don't have enough information to judge that. As I mentioned a little while ago, I think it's important to have a pretty good feel for what your customers and your citizens want and expect, and to plug that in somehow. And if that means you all sit around and say, I know from my knocking on doors in the election or from talking at the grocery store or whatever that I have plenty of information, that might be fine, and you can use that. It's just a matter of saying we decided that that's how the public input was going to be funneled into our process. And then I think right up front, you start with saying, how do we deal with the unsustainable departments? The two that come to mind that need to really be addressed are streets and drains and park maintenance. We said in the report, those were the only two where we felt that your option one cuts would bring you to a level that we felt you couldn't adapt to. And so in the case of streets and drains, we're saying that the final 10 cuts really go beyond your ability to manage at the current service. And if you wanted to do that, you'd need to add back at least 5. And park maintenance, if you took all those cuts, you wouldn't be able to survive at the current service level unless you added back 2. Again, I'm not telling you you need to do that. I'm giving you our recommendation, that, or our assessment rather, that they're unsustainable at current service levels. And so I'd say right up front, when you start talking prioritization, front and center should be, where is the most unsustainable problem and how do we deal with that first? And then it's really about saying, okay, if we know all of that and we've figured out that we've got good information and we can sit down and talk about process, then let's talk about some targets. I will tell you from my own personal experience and the experience of others that I have both talked to and dealt with as a consultant. The people that need to make this real are your staff, and they work a whole lot better if they've got a roadmap or some context that's clear. And if you can set some targets or tell them what you believe collectively, whatever that means in your world, that will enable them to feel confident about putting forward solutions that meet your needs. But they need to hear from you, what are those targets? What does X look like? If we're going from, or Y look like? We're at X now, we're going to Y. What does Y look like in your world? How does that play out? Because they'll do it for you, but they need a guide. In the medium term, and what I'm saying medium term is in the fact that you've got a 5-year time frame. This is 6 months to 2 years to initiate. I would create that continuous review process. You don't have to get that underway right now. You can do all these other things first. But I would say that you need to identify competitive requirements, create a department list for review, set the service levels of the department under review, and train your staff. You've already done that, and you've already experienced that in a number of cases. What's important going forward, you've done most of what I would consider I don't want to say easy because that downplays the significant effort you've made. The ones that are most often outsourced or privatized are the ones that you've taken on right now. You're going to start getting into some tougher ones going forward. What that's going to demand is that you say up front, well, okay, what would be the level of service we want to get out of this particular service that we're now going to subject to competitive contracting, let's say? That comes from you. If you're okay with, a lower level of service, that's cool. We do that. And then we put our competitive requirements around that service level. Easy to do. Purchasing director has done it, and John has done it. You can do it. But it's going to require that teamwork between the management team and the city council. And I think at the end of the day, long term, again, this is medium to long term, as you train your staff in the competitive contracting and what I would call general competitive requirements, it gets people to understand that there's a new way of doing business. It's now part of how we do business. Often when people go into competitive contracting, it's an add-on, or it's a special case, or it's one service, and it never happens again, and they don't get anything from that other than the benefit of that one time. What we're suggesting to you is, you're already 20, 30% down the road in your organization. Why not accelerate that? Why not make that how you do business? You're already good at it. Keep it going. Do that process improvement stuff that I talked about. I mentioned that that ought to yield you some good benefits. It's a long-term investment. But I think the nice thing about that is if you get serious about it, it integrates really well with this notion of continuous improvement. If you can tell people that what we believe in here is our cycles of continuous improvement and we never stop, then they're always looking. They're always on their toes. They're always thinking about that. If you make it a part of how we operate, then those are the rules of the road. Now, I'm talking about this as if this is so easy and that everybody ought to do that and everybody is doing that. I will tell you right now, not everybody is doing that. Very few are doing that. But there are some examples out there. We've given you some. We'll give you more. And I think, again, as I sound like a broken record, you will have better opportunities than others because you already have the experience. When you do the things like process improvement, though, it's really important to have somebody inside who's a believer in this and acts as a champion. Process improvement generally, and I'm sitting here in the Detroit environs, car companies know all about this. They're the ones that pioneered this. And so the reality is that they have ongoing Kaizen teams that constantly look at process change. And you can do that too. It's a pretty straightforward process. Finally, or to tie this together, is creating that business and strategic management approach. And I won't beat that to death other than to say that what it really means is that you agree or come to some terms in your own mind with the fact that you have a regular business cycle. And let me just talk about what this looks like. For organizations, both private and public, that operate effectively, they have a business cycle. They sit down and they look at their strategy and say, is our strategy still relevant to the environment that we're working in? Are the things that we said we wanted to achieve still on point, and has the environment changed enough that we want to tweak that? If it hasn't, we press on. If those outcomes are still valid, what are the business initiatives that we're undertaking to get us there? And what do they look like? How do we express those? And if those business initiatives are in place, what are the resources we need to support that so that we can achieve those outcomes? It's a very simple, integrated step and set of things. And then at the end of that process, if you've got those limited number of outcomes and that strategic, that regular business cycle that says initiatives and objectives, then you have to say, how do we know if we got there? Well, how you know you got there is if you set down some indicators that say, if we get to this, it's success. If we get to that, it's kind of success. And if we get to this, we missed the mark completely. A, B, C, D. Not very complicated. Now, on an individual level, that might mean that somebody on a maintenance crew has a certain cycle time they have to meet in order to get something done. On a very high level that you would look at, that might mean we meet it, we didn't meet it, it's a certain range. There are ways of doing that where you get a little dashboard that says, monthly basis or a quarterly basis, here's how we're doing on these big indicators. And it's, it plugs in. It's a different way of doing business, but I will tell you, it's not an unusual way of doing business. A well-run company will do that. If you had to go either as a private company or as a public organization, local government, and you're going to go sell bonds, and you're going to tell folks that you're a good credit, how do you prove that? How do you show them you're a AAA credit, right? Okay. One of the things they said that is going to maintain your AAA credit rating is the fact that you have this long-term plan and that you have a 3-year budget. What would supplement that and what would help that is if you could show them, well, you know what? We know where we're going, and we measure our results, and we can talk about it just like that. Or if the Chamber of Commerce calls and says, Mayor, I'd like you to come down and talk about the state of the city, wouldn't it be nice if you could just go to that booklet, pull out those 2 pages that showed those measures and said, oh, here's where we are right now. And you know what? Here's the things we're trying to accomplish this year. Here's the 6 initiatives we just approved. And oh, by the way, our quarterly report says, we're 40% of the way there. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. And again, your organization does pretty well without having that fully functioning piece. But in the new world of less resources and tougher competition, you need to step up your game, and that would be the way to do it. I was going to give you an example, but I'll hold off on that. So with that, I'm going to pause now, and there's a lot of detail in every department, and I could be here till tomorrow morning at about 5 a.m. going line by line. But rather than do that, I'd want to take a deep breath here, take a drink of water, and open it up for some questions, and then we can go in any different direction that you'd like. Okay?
Council, did you have questions or comments on certain sections going from beginning on the findings all the way to suggestions for implementation? And looking at some of the charts, did you have things that you had marked in your book when you had it over the weekend of things you wanted clarified? And who wants to go first? Member Tim Kerwin?
I just have a question on H, on your proposed restructuring.
Yes.
Have you seen this done elsewhere?
Mm-hmm.
Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let me go back on the screen. What is being done in a lot of organizations, we've worked with a couple of counties, and there are a number of cities that we've consulted with that have have taken the, what I would call, not to get too technical, a matrixed organization approach, going from a more command and control or hierarchical structure to a more matrix approach. The idea being that if you have too much reporting, too many layers of reporting, it's going to, number one, slow you down, cost you more money, and frankly orphan certain things that, if they're small in a resource-starved environment, will have a difficult time surviving. And you have sort of the classic markings of that. The way around that is to say, and usually organizations, what I said earlier about, I'm not a believer in structure leading. I think what needs to be done first is you need to say, here's what we're trying to get done. What's the best way to organize to do that? Having said that, I think it's pretty clear what you're trying to achieve, and you need to move quickly to adopt something to deal with resource elimination. And you've got some very small, almost down to single incumbent departments that aren't going to survive unless you do something different. So what we're saying is matrixed or flatter is better. It allows for some team formation. It allows for some self-direction, which I think, frankly, is better. It also gives you an infusion of new ideas into some environments, which might also accelerate the pace of change.
I know at one point you talked about the council setting the direction
Yes.
for the staff to go on, and since you've started in your report, we have met and talked about our vision and goals and have something, it's not in the final stages, but it's pretty close there. And so that is something that we've been working on to delineate that, and then of course staff indicates then the other things that come under that. We will be providing you with a copy of that so that you could also see that we
give you
worked
some
on.
feedback on that. Great.
My concern on a couple of things that you mentioned about departments that are at a point where they're not going to be sustainable and that should be combined together. If we would do something of that nature, you're not speaking physically of moving all those departments in the same particular part of the building, or are you speaking of that?
I would, Mr. Zerling?
Craig spoke to me about this, and from my perspective, it's a good recommendation that he's making. But in order to go to our traditional silos or stovepipes to a cluster, if you will, it would suit us well. I don't want to sound too radical, but it would suit us well if we vacated City Hall and perhaps went to the community center, so that when Mr. Lamorato took over the administration and finance departments, which now would include the clerks and the HR department, if we need to cross-train people, they need to be in a very close physical environment, and so they would have to physically be together. In addition to that, we're down to about 40 people in City Hall after all the cuts are made to the administrative staff. And we could actually fit who's left back in the original Township Hall at our Village Green. So to answer your question, yes, if we adopt this organizational restructuring, I would recommend that we would move to off-site, most likely the community center, and try to either sell or lease the existing City Hall. Having said that, part of the area that houses the police department, the fire department, is not the existing City Hall. They would remain in situ or in place.
Okay. And the other point is that we have, I'm sure you looked at the fact that we have our 3-year budget, and there are projections about staff numbers in the budgets going out to 2013.
Right.
Those were taken into account
Right.
as you looked at that information.
That is
based on what we've already projected.
right. We used as our operating assumption for everything that we did that what we called option 1 was this all the way out to 2013, all of the cuts. So everything, we assumed that everything would be implemented. And so that is the way to address your budget long term. And so we said, if that's the assumption, in order to make that happen, what does that mean for this department, and this department? So we took that as the baseline and evaluated everything based on that, both your 3-year budget and your 5-year out-year cuts as well.
And you indicated at the beginning, we're not going to get the police section of this until the beginning of March. I thought we
You're
were
going
getting
to,
it
in February, you're getting, I think the chief just talked to, did you talk to Len today about that? Yeah, they're getting an updated operations report sometime the next week or two, right? And so the way that it works, and Tom can probably explain this better than I can, and maybe I should just let you do that. The operations review comes in. We want to make sure that our assumptions and the numbers and the things that we looked at are correct. So we want to give the chief an opportunity to have some time to look at it. That's coming to him within the next week or two. And then once that gets squared away, then we'll be back and we'll present it to you. The difference in what we're doing with this and what gets done with the police review, the police review is an extraordinarily detailed, data-driven process. We take data from your CAD system, your dispatch system, and we match up the details of your staffing with the details of your workload demand, which is driven by the calls that you have. And we look at that, and that's what the analysis entails. And we couple that with professional judgment about how to run a police department. And so you're going to get an extraordinarily detailed examination of your staffing and workload.
And you indicated that when we gave you
Yes.
the contract, you
Yep.
did this of what
Yep.
examples of what that
Yep.
is. Okay, Councilwoman Beltramini, I think you were next, April.
Thank you, ma'am. I read this report, and thank you. I appreciate the information and the work that went into it and the turnaround. I gathered that the underlying assumption was, as you said, that all cuts would be made and it was the money with which we had to deal. And yet, somehow I got an email this afternoon that said, well, after all those departments are combined and people are cut, you'll have money left over to fund the library. I want to make clear that my understanding is the combining of departments is not to further eliminate staff. It is to allow the functions to continue at an acceptable level. And in fact, as I read this report, I saw you recommending adding back in at least 7 people, and even more if you add in the fire staff that
What?
you feel will be actually essential to service preservation.
If you wish to keep, you'll permit me a little bit of background before I answer that directly. We took on faith in most cases what we judge to be your service level, because there isn't a lot of detail about what that means. Okay, So, you know, we've all been around. I've been in this business over almost 35 years, and so I know what it looks like, and so do my colleagues. But even with that, we can't tell exactly to the nth degree what that service level is. So what we're saying is, to maintain what you have and what we believe you have, you would have to add back the 2 in parks and the 5, or not cut the 2 in parks or the final 5 in streets and drains, if you want to maintain what you have. If you don't want to maintain what you have and you need to go there, I'm agnostic about that. I'm saying go ahead and do it. But if the charge is to tell you, are these sustainable at current levels, we're saying sustainability at current levels would demand that you back off by 5 and 2 in order to hold those. The other ones, we think that you have a fighting chance to make do by doing all the other combinations. And it might be that after you've made those combinations and after you've had some time to look at how those things mesh, you might be able to say, yeah, okay, maybe there's another position we can get out of this, but we're not saying that up front. We're saying you need a fighting chance to, you know, be able to continue. This gives you that best chance. Yeah, we think long term it might give you a chance to say, yeah, there's some more flex we have here, but we don't know that yet.
Thank you. Is that complete?
Is there any time for citizens to ask a question, or is now the time?
Not now. Did you have anything, Mr.?
Wait in. Again, Mike Robin, I appreciate the thoroughness of this report. But when we were initiating this report, we were talking about the cost effectiveness and opportunities for cost reduction and so forth. And I see you've evaluated where we are, and the staff's looked at where we are. But what I was hoping to see in this is also some recommendations of other things that we could do and a dollar figure associated with that would relate to the budget that we're trying to live with. We all knew we had the budget and the plan, and we knew what we were trying to do, and it needs to be detailed more. But I was hoping to see something, Craig, that showed additional things you would recommend based upon your review that we had not thought of, but because you look at all these other different cities, and some recommendations with a dollar figure associated with it. And what I see is, I see what you've done, you have a plan, here's some suggestions to move forward. But do you have anything that's concrete that you could suggest we do that would have some additional, give us some additional cost savings or cost reductions that we have not?
I think when we came into this and when we talked initially, the idea here was you had a major concern that you're trying to deal with a significantly reduced floor in your budget, and that we would come in and we would take a look at all of the core things that you're doing, and we would try to give you every idea or recommendation we had in terms of restructuring and alternative service delivery. We did that, and it became clear immediately that the most difficult thing that you have to address is what is the level of service that's appropriate for you. Now, I could tell you that by John and Mark moving and doing this, I'm going to save X number of dollars. But the savings that you're getting is the ability to meet your reduction as opposed to solving your reduction. What I guess if I didn't do anything and you didn't have my report, you would have significant impacts to your budget in the amount of millions of dollars. And what I've done without putting dollar signs to each of those changes is helped you to fill in those multi-million-dollar reductions and say you can hold that even now. And so we came at it almost from the other direction. I hope I'm not being too obtuse about this, but what we're saying is you had nowhere to go but up, and we tried to fill that for you by saying, alternative service delivery here, unsustainable there, restructure here, fix that there. The combination of the departments is going to be a significant reduction. I could put a dollar figure on that for you, but it's not a dollar figure that you're going to save. It's a dollar figure that means more capacity to meet the service delivery that you have. So that's where we're at.
Councilman Slater?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that we're dealing with internally and externally is a disbelief.
Yeah.
That somebody could come in and take a look at us and say, well, we can save $10 million by doing something. And I think you've experienced this disbelief before.
Yep.
Maybe you could talk about some things to do to help with that.
Let me tell you where I come down as a professional and our association would come down ethically. My obligation is to meet the requirements of this contract, number one. But number two, I feel an extraordinary burden to call it as I see it and to be transparent with that. And so the way that we're looking at this is to tell you that, number one, you have a fairly easy job in one respect. Your city manager, your leadership team has said, here's how to solve your problem, and you've solved it. Okay? You could walk away from that and you would be done. Our judgment, our professional judgment and our analysis says that if you do that, you will not be able to sustain certain operations at their current level. I believe strongly in that. I believe it's sustained by the facts, and I feel that that's the number one thing that I need to tell you coming out of this report. It may not have been what everyone was looking for or expecting, but the facts are that you've made significant and difficult choices to address this problem. Now, you could have done it in 2 years or 1 year or 3 years. There are many organizations across the country that I know of personally and have dealt with that have done this over a course of 2 years. They've closed parks and sold libraries and cut police and sheriff departments. And I can explain who they are. The fact of the matter is that you've got a 5-year plan with a 3-year budget, and you're giving yourself at least some chance to either feather out the reduction that you're going to get or to fill in that gap with some restructuring, with some change, and maybe with adding back. I'm not going to go there and tell you that. My obligation was to say you can't keep your current service level with your cut. And I'd like to have come up with a great idea for how streets and drains and parks maintenance could fix that. We spent, I don't know, John, how many hours did we spend talking about that? There was a lot of time trying to figure out that. At some level, you go beyond the point at which I can responsibly tell you that you can continue the way you are. And that's the level. That is that level. Even in a completely privatized or contracted situation, you still need to manage a contract, and you still need to know what a service level is. I will tell you that the biggest hole and the biggest hill for us to climb was saying, if I'm going to give you some good ideas about alternative service delivery or efficiency and effectiveness without knowing what you think service level acceptability is, puts me in a tough spot. I can guess. I know kind of what you're doing now. But when you went out and talked about engineering or public or the building inspection function, you talked about what you wanted to get out of that. You had an advanced conversation that said, here's what we're looking for, and here's what we need, and we're going to set these parameters so that when we go to the marketplace, somebody can talk to us apples to apples. I didn't have that conversation in all those other places. So what I was constrained by was saying, you know what, this is a good service to do differently, and here's some suggestions. And we have a lot of efficiency and effectiveness, recommendations that you can implement, including some alternative service delivery ideas. But it still requires you to have that previous discussion, like you did with building inspections, to say, here's what we really want to get out of this. Because if we're going to go out and secure that in the marketplace, they got to know what we're looking for. We need to define it. Craig can't define that. Tom can't define that. You have to define that. So maybe circling back to the question of how do you make folks understand that, what I think my obligation is to paint this in a context, to say, here's our analysis of where you are and what you've done, and to shine a light on that, and then to say, you really are going to make things unsustainable. And I can stand behind that. I feel confident saying that as a professional, a local government professional, that's where you are. And I can bring the horse to water, I can't make him drink. I can't make people believe me, but I can at least stand behind the statistics.
Councilman Slater, did he answer what you were getting at, or did I think something else?
No, I
Taking a circular route, perhaps. I'm sorry.
It might be difficult to answer, but whether we would have chosen option A or B or C or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, the bottom line is declining revenues. We can still look at different options for doing service if we want to change. We could change services.
Right.
But we're still stuck with our declining revenues at what we have. So we still have a problem, but we can change some of it. But we're still stuck with a problem. And it's a severe problem.
Right.
And if you don't look at it in 5 years or 3 years, you don't get the whole picture.
Right. You have, let me just see if I can encapsulate it simply. You have a $10 million problem over 5 years. Would that be right, John? $10.5 million over a 5 year. I mean, in terms of decline in your revenue stream.
Yeah, we're losing a few $1 million a year.
Okay.
So yes.
But the point is that if I took every department, maybe to go back to your example of how much money, if I went to every department and I said, I'm going to privatize this, or I'm going to eliminate that, you could add that. I could add that to the line. The question is, before I did that, I'd need to know the level that I'm going to in order to put a number on that savings. And I can't do that without knowing the level. That's why I had to start with the idea of saying service level first, savings second. Tom?
Just as an example, 21 years ago when I started as city manager in Ionia, we had, and the importance of setting that level. I thought our parks and recreation was costing too much. Everybody in town said, oh my gosh, you're wasting money, your people are spending too much. I couldn't really quantify it. So we sat down and said, what do you expect? Well, we expected parks to be mowed once a week. That's what our customers said. They wanted all the city parks mowed once a week. They wanted everything edged in the parks, all the equipment, once a week. They wanted, dandelions were a big problem. They wanted those sprayed in the spring. That's when you could still do that. But we set that up and we bid it. And the first year, our bid came in that the private sector would do it for $15,000 a year. Our DPW was costing us over $40,000. And so we went through a 3-year bid. When it came to the 3-year bid, I went back to DPW and said, you can bid it. You're going to bid when that bid comes up. They were able to bring it in at $14,800. What was the difference? They sat down and said, well, the first thing is you've been buying all the wrong equipment. The private sector buys the zero-turn mowers and everything else. We were buying these big John Deere monsters that took 2-3 people to haul around. They were able to come up with the way to resolve it and meet our criteria. Because if I didn't set the criteria, what would the private sector do? We'll come in and mow it every month. So it's really important to set that level of service up front, because otherwise, do you know what you're getting? And if that's not clear, I mean, I could do it for $5,000. I'll give you a great break, but I may never mow your parks all summer. So it's really important to set those service levels and those expectations and have the customer buy-in